Hello,
Hi, Charu.
how are you?
Good, good. How about you?
I'm good also.
Yeah, so we will wait for 2 minutes for our co-speaker to join us. Otherwise, we begin, right?
Sure.
So I think meanwhile, at least let me just introduce you to our audience and probably then Ms. Darshita may join us meanwhile. So Charu, warm good evening to you
Thank you.
from WEF Global Digital Summit 2020. I'm Dr. Leena, Associate Director, International Relations and Professor at Christ University, Bangalore, and I'll be moderating the session today. So, just a small brief about you to our audience. Charu is BTech and MBA qualified, immensely versatile and creative individual of entrepreneurial attitude with a proven track record of operations, marketing, and projects, delivering quantifiable results while managing multiple stakeholders. She worked for an e-commerce startup, negotiating the best partnership deals, penetrating to new markets, expanding the customer base, 7,000 plus transactions, boosting sales. Wow, amazing, Charu. That's something incredible. Working for 4 years with Logistics Solution, company growing client base from SME to Fortune 500. Worked as a project manager for 3+ years with L&T, and I led cross-functional teams of 100 plus for multi-million dollar projects globally. Currently leading growth at Series A funded startup, and she has much, much more to her credentials than what I read here. So, Charu, I think we will begin the session and we would like you to give us your inputs on the topic today. So, over to you.
Thank you, Lina. Thanks for warm introduction. So, although I'm in BTech and an MBA, currently I'm a businesswoman primarily, but I'm a techie at heart. And I believe that knowing about tech is a need of the hour. So I'm here to give you a basic understanding about the blockchain pros and cons. And because it's a very complex topic, so I have tried to keep this very easy to understand, though I hope your concentration to be there in the session because it's quite full of big tech words. So, and I hope that you through this session you get a good foundation of this new disruptive technology.
Looking forward.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start. And as an introduction, I would say blockchain is a fairly complex topic with various positive and negative notions attached to it. So primarily, blockchain is a chain of blocks that contains data. It is a distributed ledger that is completely open to anyone. So it has a very interesting characteristics, as many of you might have heard, that once a data has been recorded inside the blockchain, it is very difficult to change it. So for understanding more, let us take a closer look at what a block is. So basically block contains some data. Okay, so the hash of the block and the hash of the previous block, these are the three attributes of a block. So data stored could be of any type, and it would depend mostly on the type of the blockchain. And hash is a cryptographic code created by special algorithms. It identifies the block and if all of its content, and it is a unique thing about the block. It's more, you can understand, it's like a fingerprint of a person. So once a block has been created, its hash has been already calculated, and therefore if we change any data slightest inside the block, the hash would ultimately change. The third element of the block is the hash of the previous block, which effectively creates a chain of the blocks, and this makes blockchain so secure. For example, if I may say that if you change any data inside the block, its hash will change, and so the hash of the following blocks would become invalid, as they do not have a valid hash of the previous block. So even with that, computers nowadays have become so fast that they can recalculate the hashes of all the following blocks and even make the blockchain valid again. Thus, to slow down the creation of new blocks, blockchain has something called proof of work, which slows down the creation of new blocks. For example, in Bitcoin, it takes 10 minutes to recalculate the required proof of work and add a new block to the blockchain. So if you tamper with one block, you would need to recalculate the proof of work for all the following blocks. Now, another reason, which is the most basically known reason for blockchain to remain so secure, is that it is distributed. For what I mean by is it that instead of a centralized entity to manage the blockchain, blocks use a peer-to-peer network. Like everyone is allowed to join in. So anyone who is joining the network gets a full copy of the blockchain and can verify that everything is still in order. So when someone creates a new block, it sends to every node on the network, which then verifies that it is untempered. And only if it qualifies, then this new information, this new node, this new information in the form of block is added by each of the node to their own blockchain. That way, all nodes in the network create a consensus. So that's why until unless the information is uh, is in consensus with the at least 50% of the blockchain, the block would not be added to the block. The block would not be approved. So thus, ultimately, we can understand to successfully tamper with any block, one would need to tamper with all the blocks of the blockchain, redo the proof of work for each block, and then take control of more than 50% of the peer-to-peer network. So this, all these three things doing at the same time is nearly impossible to achieve. That's why from this we can understand the major pros of this technology is first being the distributed, because it is less prone to technical failures and malicious attacks, as it all the information is stored across a variety of like network of computers. So each node is able to replicate and store the data, where the copy of the database is not affected by a single node. Like if a particular computer or if a particular server has been hacked, it will not affect the availability of the blockchain. So while most databases in current system are stored only with over one server or maximum few servers. So in comparison, blockchain is a much more secure technology for in terms of technical failures and cyber attacks. The second, and what you can say the more important application pro for the blockchain, is that once the information is added, it becomes impossible to change it. From this, it has got many bigger applications that this makes the transactions more secure. That's why in financial data and real estate records, wherever a audit trail is required, blockchain is a very important technology there, because every change is timestamped. So every change which would happen in the transaction between two people for a real estate thing or a financial thing would be timestamped for every entry of the data. So that is very important to add to finally locate who is the owner of the data, who is the owner of a piece of land, for the transactions, for everything. Like you can trace back everything to its origin. And also blocks on the blockchain can store data, not only about monetary stuff, but they have very wider applications in terms of property exchanges, supply chain, and keeping the healthcare records of people, so that they not even like no one can tamper with, and it is accessible across the network. And even for the voting system, as of now, but we may have been hearing many disputes regarding the malicious practices adopted by governments in the voting systems. So ultimately, it is making every transaction very secure and transparent for all the uh, for all the network. Ultimately, it's a trustless system. So blockchain omits the requirement of intermediaries such as the banks and the payment provider. because verification is done by the distributed network of nodes through a process called as mining. That is why blockchain is referred to as a trustless system. Another benefit from there only we can understand that because there is no low to no human intervention, the data stored in a blockchain is very accurate. That it is the accuracy of it when there is no human intervention, it automatically increases. And also because it is stored in the computers, it is does not depend on banks and third parties. It is available 24/7 across the globe wherever the network is basically, but it does not depend on the working hours and the limitations of humans and the banks and any calamity or anything which may happen. And finally, we can understand from this that also for in terms of consumers, it leads to cost reduction, as we don't no longer need to pay to the banks, notary, and other intermediaries for verifying and keeping our records. And also, there is no need of centralized authorities. So, theoretically, as of now, blockchain can eliminate the transaction fees. But as like any other technology, blockchain has many cons too. One of the cons regarding the cost only is that blockchain require proof of work, which is inefficient in terms that mining is slower and it consumes huge amount of power and computational capacity. So one example which maybe many of you might have heard, that blockchain, that for Bitcoin, the network required a total amount of energy which was consumed by countries, Denmark and Ireland, over an year. So that is the sort of amount of energy, computational power we are talking about. So it is very energy intense, exhaustive. So a lot, mining the blockchain blocks is a very it's not a very cost effective method. Ultimately, also like there is a lot more discussion going around 51% tax, though these sort of cyber attacks are still in theory, they have never actually happened, but definitely these attacks are theoretically possible. And these attacks means that a person can take control over the 50% of 51% of the network and can tamper with the data. That's what it is about. But these attacks are in very difficult to execute because the computational power again, which would be required to do that such sort of activity, is enormous. Like for any illegal activity to happen on such a large scale, it is not a very actually a practically feasible thing. As of at least as of now, it has not happened. And ultimately, you might have like every other technology, it can be used in very negative terms as well, because it maintains the anonymity. And the most the basically important, the biggest con is that while the confidentiality on the blockchain network protects users from hacks and maintains their privacy, it also gives the same thing to people who want to use it for their illegal things, like trading of drugs and collecting ransomware from people, and trading of even the weapons and money laundering cases. And many such cases can happen, and they already happened. Many ransomware attacks, many of you have heard also, which happened quite some, not even far long in the past. And these type of activities, upon wider adoption of blockchain, that they can increase as well. And lastly, because blockchain uses public key or cryptography to you give its ownership for its cryptocurrency unit, each blockchain has a private key. So effectively, if a person uses its private key to access his or her data, or about, and basically it's the right of the person over that data or transaction or anything, then if the person loses it, then it is gone forever. Basically, there is no possible way to retrieve that. So if you lose your money, and like if you lose a private key, then effectively your money is lost. And unlike banks, where you can retrieve it even after that, in blockchain there is no method as of now to retrieve that thing back. So I would say the real challenges still for this technology are political and regulatory, as this has to be much global thing, and there are very unclear uh, regulatory and political measures as of now for this technology, and they are not even standardized across the globe. And ultimately, the custom software design and backend programming for integrating this blockchain to the existing network is also a very difficult thing to achieve, and it will require another sort of investment and sort of different capabilities for different countries. But in conclusion, I would say that blockchain is a technology of trust, and its pros are immensely useful for us, especially like for consumers. We can track back the origins of anything we purchase, and uh, keep or maintain transparency in that system of not just in our country, of everything we do across the globe. But whether its pros would ultimately outweigh its cons, I would say it will definitely depend more on how we utilize this technology.
Okay.
So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So Charu, I have a few questions for you.
Yeah.
What is this blockchain wallet and how does decentralization work in blockchain?
So decentralization works as it is distributed. Basically, blockchain, ultimately the centralized system is like a bank or any uh, basically major governing authority maintaining the records and verifying it for us. So decentralization is it is not just by one bank or anyone. It is across a network of basically nodes, which is the computer in for normal purpose for people to understand. It is distributed across a network, and that's why if you have to get that copy, you have to understand that record, that see that record. You don't need to go to that particular bank or that particular centralized system. You can have the same sort of data through each of the nodes in the network. So, and that's why it doesn't depend on any of the problems or issues we face with the bank in terms of uh, keeping up the data, transparency, and many other trust issues as well, if we see the cross boundary and across the globe transactions. So that's why it is across the network of the thing remains the same, and it cannot be tempered with. If any one person or any one node is had, it cannot be tampered until 51% of the people agree that this is the valid thing. That's
Okay.
why. That's
Okay. So you did mention about Bitcoin mining.
how. Mhm.
I remember while reading some research paper, I also read something about Bitcoin halving. Um,
So, I am not much conversant with that.
okay.
Can you just like, give me what was then
So
I'll.
this was, I think, more to do with transaction-based
Mhm.
theories, when
Mhm.
they were talking about Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin halving, and
Mhm.
of course about the wallet. So while I was going through the research paper, these are the three things what they have covered in the research paper.
Mhm.
So I was not understanding how does this Bitcoin halving works. Anyway, so I'll read about it more and probably I'll connect with you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
personally
I'll
and then
also.
we'll have discussion on this one.
Yeah,
Another thing, another question what I have for you is what is next for uh, this particular industry, blockchain?
so basically, first and foremost, we need regulations around it, because in India, as you like, all of us knew that it was a booming technology. We all many of us invested in that because that time it was giving crazy gains to us, and
Right.
then it became illegal, and then still now it is legal in some countries, it's illegal in some countries. So the major roadblock and basically the way ahead requires proper standardized regulations across the globe.
Mhm.
And also the whatever the governments are involved in, they have to do some sort of investments in the research of this technology, because to finally implement it, and to one thing is being there and being in theory, and one thing is being implemented by across the industries. So as you maybe have noticed also that some industries have already started applying it, like you can trace now the products to the farm, and many companies are also offering, whoever are claiming that sustainable practices and all, they are claiming that okay, we are uh, having this practices which are very transparent, so
Like
you can
farm to
see.
fork. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that sort of things are there, but they are still not very widespread.
Okay.
So for anything to like, there is already investment going on a lot on global scale, but not all the basically not all the governments are doing it. Only the bigger companies who have that sort of resources are doing that. So ultimately it depends on how governments take it.
Mm-hmm.
That is the main thing which governments have to make it, so that at least it's legal for people to go
Right,
for this thing, and
right,
then
right.
yeah, explore
Because theoretically, when we read about blockchain, there is so much, but when it comes to practicing,
it. Yeah,
we don't see so much happening. So I
yeah,
think that gap somewhere has to be addressed in future.
yeah.
So wonderful, Charu. I'll just see if there are any questions, and then probably. Um, no, I don't see any questions. So, Charu, I think we are good to go. So, thank you so much for joining us and being with us, accepting our invite to come and speak to everyone over here on this platform. So, on behalf of WEF Global Digital Summit 2020, we would like to honor you with an award, which is Iconic Women Creating a Better World for All. Congratulations and thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, and
Thank you
we
so
will
much.
definitely connect in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lena, for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Good
a lot.
evening. Bye bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Good evening, Spriha.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
So I think we are before time.
Yeah, I just decided to sign in to just make sure it's all fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So probably we'll wait for a few minutes and then we come online. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In
Yes.
another 4 minutes or so.
Yes. So I'll just go out of my video screen and then we catch up sharp at 5:30. Is that okay?
Yep, that's absolutely fine. See
Thank
you
you.
then.
Yes, Priya, we're
Hi.
back. Hi. So, shall we begin?
Yes, absolutely. Whenever you're ready.
Yes. So, warm good evening. And I'm Dr. Leena Fouquet, Associate Director, International Relations and Professor at Christ University, Bangalore. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our audience today. So, little bit about Spriha Srivastav. Um, She is currently executive editor, Business Insider London, running the Europe newsroom for Business Insider, overseeing tech, finance, markets, retail strategy beats out of the London newsroom, coordinating with teams to ensure major news stories are covered and then liaising with the social media team to push the story for maximum impact, responsible for the expansion of UK newsroom and sorry, constantly involved in interviewing and hiring the right candidates, speaker, moderator at a number of external events across the range of subjects from economy, politics, gender issues to tech. Um, and I think she has much, much more to her credentials. Spriya, we are really glad that you're with us today to speak to our audience. And I think we would like you to begin with our topic for the evening is fake news killing the social fabric. Over to you, Spriha.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such a warm introduction. And I'm very, very pleased to be here. I'm so glad that I'm part of WEF again. The last time I attended one of the WEF meetings was at The Hague and then back in London again about 2 years ago. So this digital world is entirely amazing how we've all sort of become connected as
Lovely.
one world.
Connected again.
Yeah, you're sitting in India, I'm sitting here in London, and
Yes.
it's really nice. So it's great. I'm very happy to talk about this topic. This is very close to my heart, and having been a journalist for nearly 12 years, this is a topic that sometimes, sort of irritates journalists as well, because fake media is not something that anybody wants to be called and anybody wants to deal with. So I'll give you a little background on how we sort of go about this topic, and then I'll talk a little bit about the challenges we face as journalists. So media has evolved a lot, and we all know that the world we live in now is very different from the world that was 20 years ago, maybe, where we were dependent on print newspapers. I mean, I still remember growing up, going out to fetch the newspaper outside the house,
Yes.
and then bringing it back in, and then opening it and reading it,
Yes.
or my father sitting with a cup of tea in the morning and reading a newspaper. That was a different world, where you would actually wait for the news bulletin at 9 p.m. in the night, and then depend on what happens, you sort of discuss in your sitting in your living room on what's happening. So the digital media, where I'm working now, has completely sort of penetrated into people's lives in every aspect of their life at every time of their life. So starting from the moment we wake up, we switch on our phone and we look at Twitter and we think something has happened. We know what's going on. We go to the toilet, we are still on our phone. We come out, we are having breakfast, we have the TV on, or we have Facebook on, or Twitter on, or LinkedIn on. So it's changed a lot in terms of how we cover news, and it's great for viewers, it's great for readers, because we are informed on a regular basis in terms of what's going on. But people like us who are behind the scenes, who are behind the desk as journalists, we find that very difficult sometimes to deal with, because one, social media is great and everybody wants to be a journalist, which also means that there's immense amount of information out there. So to give you an example, somebody spots something happening outside, they take a video, they put it on Twitter, and then that video goes viral. And it comes to us as journalists, where we are asked to cover a story like that, and the first response you have is, do we know the other side of the story? We probably don't. We've just seen somebody with a camera and it's gone viral, but you're still meant to report on it because it's become such a big story. So while social media is great, it also has immense challenges. And Twitter being one, I think the Twitter has exploded so much over the past few years, more so ever since President Donald Trump came to power, because he changed the way people started tweeting now. An American president using Twitter to make announcements, an American president using Twitter to fire people from his office, or to be able to just rant about other things, suddenly meant that everybody was going to Twitter to get news, which also meant that as journalists, we had two big challenges. One was fact, fact checking, and second is accuracy. And sorry, fact checking and speed. So you want to be able to balance these two things as a journalist. You want to be absolutely credible, which means that the news that you get out should be true, should not be fake, should not have any problems, should not have any misinformation. And you also want to be the first to break it out. So these two things are very difficult to balance. And over the past 10 years of my career, I feel like these are two things that I feel the most sensitive about it. When running my team as well, I say, you can be a good journalist by writing a story, but you can only be a really good journalist if you're able to manage these two aspects properly. So to give you an example, when the coronavirus pandemic happened, we all sort of went back to our drawing board, because suddenly we felt, oh, how are we going to deal with a pandemic like this? We don't have enough information, but we have the rest of the world looking out to us to be able to carry this information out to them. So as media, you are carriers of information. But in a situation like this, a pandemic, which has happened probably the first time in anybody's life, in any of our lives, where we are thrown into a situation like this. We are still evolving with information. Every day you have new information coming in. One day the WHO says masks are not really useful, then they do nothing. The second day WHO comes back and says, actually, you should be wearing masks now because it's really important to do that. Another day, Trump says, you should use hydrochloroquine because it's safe. The other day, somebody else says that, no, you should not be using it. So you're constantly struggling between two kinds of knowledge. But as journalists, you're also evolving. You have to grasp this information very quickly and present it to your readers, to present it to your followers, your customers who are dependent on you for information. So it's a big, big responsibility that media has in the current situation, where you are constantly worried whether what you're actually putting out there is right or not. How do you check that? And you have very little time. So for instance, when the WHO ruling came out, we got like 5 minutes to be able to break down that information and then write it and present it to our readers. 5 minutes is not enough for anybody to grasp an information, especially for something along the lines of pandemic, which nobody understands how it's heading. I mean, even the scientists don't know which way we are heading. There's so much uncertainty. So I feel like as journalists, you're always challenged to be able to pick up the information, read through it, understand, break it down, and then present to your customers. So that's the sort of background into where how as journalists we deal with the constant news coming in. The second big challenge is, how do we differentiate between what is right and what is wrong? And sometimes it's very difficult to do that because, as I said in the beginning, news has changed the way it used to be presented. So earlier times when you had a 24-hour period to get the news out, you had the newspaper print out in the morning, the next set of news will only go out the next day. So you've got 24 hours to verify your news. You're not in a rush to get things out. That's completely changed. You are constantly getting ahead of yourself because you've got stuff coming out on Twitter. You get news from Twitter now. When a Bollywood actor gets coronavirus, the first time you hear the news is through Twitter, not through a news channel. So you have added pressure on yourself on how you deal with that. How do you know what's right, what's wrong? So some of the things that I do with my team is when it's Twitter, we always ensure that it's a verified Twitter profile that we carry the news from. There is just so much fake news going around that you have to be very careful. I mean, taking Amitabh Bachchan's example, for instance, he tweeted on his own that he got coronavirus. A few days later, some other account tweeted saying he's now negative. And everybody went around covering that news in the Indian media channel. But then he tweeted a few hours later saying, this is fake news, this is not right. So sometimes it just makes sense for you to step back and wait for the actual confirmation to come through, because sometimes you're just sitting there and thinking, oh, actually, NDTV has gone with it, Aaj Tak has gone with it, maybe we should also go with it. But it doesn't work like that. If they're wrong, you could be wrong. So you have to wait till you get a proper verification. So this is an example from the Indian media in terms of what the stuff I cover. Sometimes you have things, bigger things, like for instance, you hear that a CEO of a particular company is stepping down. And this is all rumors that you've heard. How do you verify that? You call the company's press office first thing first. If there is a rumor, they'll always be able to help you to do that. Sometimes they'll say, we'll come up with a announcement in a few hours, wait for it. In which case you might have sources of your own, you might have network of your own, which you then start to ask people about. And then you say that, oh, you know what, I've heard this rumor. Can you tell me if you know anything about it? And as you know, you're sort of an investigator. As a journalist, you wear many hats. You wear the hat of a researcher, you wear the hat of an investigator, a detective at many times as well, where you're constantly trying to find the information and see, is this right? Is this wrong? And then once you have that information, that's when you publish it. Because once you publish something, it's out there. You cannot unpublish it. You cannot pull it back. So we're constantly facing that problem, you know, as journalists. The other thing is and I've realized more with the coronavirus pandemic, is the amount of misinformation that's out there in the market. WhatsApp is a really big platform which spreads misinformation. And I'm sure you and I are aware of the amount of WhatsApp forwards that we get through the day.
Oh, yes.
And to be able to say, you know, starting from you should eat garlic to avoid coronavirus, to things like you should, you know, do yoga 10 times a day, to some conspiracy theories about how this was probably a Chinese attempt to, take over the rest of the world. So you always have these WhatsApp forwards that come through, and people are like, oh my God.
Yes.
People follow that, and people forward it on. People read it, they digest it, and then they forward it on.
Right.
That's and when as a rational person, you know, somebody in the media, or somebody who's sort of reasoning it out, goes to them and says, this is not true. There is no evidence to back up something like this, then they back off, because this is all a forward message that's been sent around. So I think WhatsApp, while it's great that it's connected us all around and it's brought us together as a world, it's also thrown these massive challenges in front of us where we don't know what's right and what's wrong. We are not able to verify information very quickly, because things just spread on WhatsApp so quickly.
Right.
There are fake images, there are fake information, there are videos that are made very quickly in a fake manner. So how do you deal with that? So that's why when we come back to the topic of, is fake news sort of killing social fabric? It is killing social fabric, because when you read these things, they create this sort of resentment in your mind, where you start to think, you know what, this is a conspiracy theory. I've got 10 forwards telling me that, you know, coronavirus is China's fault, so I'm going to stop all Chinese food from now on. So that's the reaction that you see, whereas there is no evidence to back something like that up. Similarly, you see, you get forwards about how garlic is great for coronavirus, and everybody suddenly starts eating garlic because they feel it's right. These are smaller examples. We had a much bigger issue in the US with the Black Lives Matter movement, where a lot of social media in that such a scenario was useful, because people were able to come out and people were able to get on the streets and protest and talk about what they really feel about. So in keeping both these examples, in some areas, social media is really strong and it helps us as journalists. We just have to be very sure about what's right and what's wrong. And in the other area, sometimes you have to, it is a really strong tool in the hands of people. And we've seen that in India as well. When the Nirbhaya rape case happened, young people took to social media to actually be out on the streets and protest. And, that is the reason the case got fast-tracked as well. So we just have to know how to use it. It's a very strong tool. But if it starts to go into the territory of where it starts to spread resentment, it starts to spread fake news, that's when it starts to come in between social fabric, and it starts to sort of mess with our social system, our family system, our sort of information system, so to say. So I'm going to pause there if you have any questions or anything.
Yeah. So I have two questions. How do you encourage behavior change to make people less susceptible to disinformation?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So as journalists, every single day you're dealing with, it's sort of misinformation really, and disinformation both. Our idea is to be able to take that and process that into, right evidence information and send it back to the readers. So I'll give you an example. So a few weeks later, we had somebody from my team was writing a story about this particular video that went viral, which claimed that the whole coronavirus pandemic is a conspiracy. There was no evidence in that video. There was nothing to back that up. There were just 4 or 5 people in that video who were just talking from their experience about how this whole thing is a massive conspiracy. They were also saying things like the medicine, the hydroxychloroquine, is actually going to save people, whereas there is no evidence to back that up. WHO hasn't given any evidence. They also talked about how various vaccine companies are making this as a money-making venture. There's no evidence to back that up. You have vaccine companies working really hard to try and develop a vaccine. We all know that. So my reporter decided to write a story on that particular topic because that particular video was going viral everywhere, from Facebook to Twitter to YouTube, with millions and millions of viewers. So we decided to look into every single aspect of that video. So we decided to make a list of all the evidence, all the sort of claims the video had made about how this particular pandemic is a conspiracy. And then for every claim that was made, we decided to provide evidence and say, claim one, a hydrochloroquine is safe for coronavirus. Our evidence suggests that the WHO has not really backed this medicine. There is no evidence to prove that this is good for treating malaria, but it's not for treating coronavirus. Right. So when we were able to do that, we published that story to say, this video may be going viral, but here is the breakdown of every single claim that this video has made, and there is no evidence to back that up. Mm-hmm. And you encourage that behavior by responding with evidence, because you cannot respond with another conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. You cannot shut down these things by saying that's wrong information. You shouldn't be forwarding it. You can only shut it down when you're able to provide them with enough evidence and say, right, you may think this way, but here's the evidence to show you that it's not right.
Correct. So my second question is, what are the top three threats that fake news pose globally and locally in India?
Yeah. So I'll talk about globally first, and then we can talk about India. So globally, I think the biggest risk that you have with fake news is the spread of toxic information. Mm-hmm. The spread of toxic information that is going into people's minds, that is sort of spreading across the world, and people are not able to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. So that's definitely the biggest, I think, risk. The second risk is readers not able to understand what's right and what's wrong. So nobody is able to understand what's fake news and what's not fake news. And thanks to the American president at the moment, everybody thinks that anything that's anti-Donald Trump is fake news. So it's very difficult for readers to be able to. So people are taking sides very quickly now. The world is becoming very, very polarized. You have camps which did not happen before. So you have people who are very right-wing who think that anything that the media says which is anti-right-wing is fake news. You have people who are very, very pro establishment currently, who are very sort of so basically what I'm trying to say is they're very, very polarized groups across the world right now. And the past 4 years of American presidency, you've had Brexit in the UK as well, you've had Scottish referendum, and a lot of countries have gone through these changes, which has led people to be get into these polarized camps. And the spread of information, the spread of misinformation has fueled that. So people have suddenly started to have no trust in media because they think, oh, actually, it's all fake news. Whereas it's not fake news. It's a thin border between what is fake news and what is credible news. So that's the second challenge that the world is facing. The third challenge, I think, is for journalists to be able to identify how to do their jobs correctly, because it can sometimes be very, very, demoralizing for journalists to be able to get some information out because they think that's the right information, and being told a few hours later that actually you got conned, that was wrong. That wasn't the right information. Because as a journalist, you spend a lot of time in a story, you invest a lot of time in a story, you do all the fact checking. But then when you realize, actually, that's wrong. So for instance, there's a company that's been making videos, fake videos, which is a scary thing. It's, they can actually make videos with, let's say, Narendra Modi's photo in it. And you would actually look at the video and never be able to say that it's a fake video.
Right, yeah.
And there are lots of videos like that floating around with Obama, with President Trump, with Boris Johnson. And it's very difficult to be able to identify whether that video is fake or not. So what we need there is we need better software. We need better technology for newsrooms to be able to look at that video and say, right, this is not right. This is a fake video because of these and these reasons. And then you sort of be able to do that. So I think those are three big ones for the world. For India, I think India is a very different sort of a market. India is the biggest user of WhatsApp. And I think while that's a good thing, that's also a bad thing for India. It's such a massive country. It's very multifaceted. So, I always tell people that India, even though India is such a big country and it's all one, you could have many different countries in India within together, just because of the culture, the varied culture, the varied mindset, the varied languages, everything. Because of which what's happening is, I think ever since the use of social media, there has been strong regionalism within India. There are strong blocks, but in this case, both communal blocks, caste blocks, and state blocks. To be able to, so once something happens in one state, automatically another state gets goes against it. So I think in India it's become very, very polarized that way. There is also the whole debate about Narendra Modi versus non-Narendra Modi fans, and you can see that on Twitter, you can see that on social media, which is getting very, very violent sometimes as well. So I think in India, while social media is great, and I think in India as a country really needed that social media push, just because we are about 1 billion people or more than that now. And as I said, in cases like Nirbhaya, and in cases going up, the whole Me Too movement, I feel like if India did not have social media, this thing would not have come out. And one of the reasons that all of the Me Too predators were able to come out was because women took to social media, women took to Twitter and talked about their experiences. And this would not have happened because we're a country where we expect women to be quiet.
So
We
true.
tell them to be quiet because we ask them to move on in life.
Correct.
We took to social media and we said, this happened with me, I was raped or I was molested. And suddenly everybody started thinking, oh my God, we've given the power to them to be able to talk. How do we deal with this? So I think in some cases it's been great, and I really appreciate the way social media has helped India, especially the Indian young youth, to be able to get on that ladder. But I still feel it's created more and more divide generally.
Okay. And my last question to you is there a way that the fake news challenges or threats uh, can be converted into opportunities?
Yeah. So that's actually a really good question. And a lot of countries and a lot of media houses, and that's what big organizations like Facebook are doing now, is fact checking. You see more and more companies hiring people to do fact checking now. So it's created jobs, really. It's created a whole industry of fact checking, not just for media companies, but for political parties, for governments. I mean, if governments have to act on something, I'll give you an example. When the Black Lives Matter movement happened, it was all over social media when it took off. But you need, for a government, for military or for police to be able to act, for law enforcement to be able to act, they need to see facts before they can send their troops. They need fact checking proper. Same thing with media companies. They need to have fact checking in place before they can react on any news. So the big opportunity, one, is there is lots of fact checking everywhere. You've had both humans being employed to do that. You have softwares, massive technological advancement across everywhere to be able to do these fact checking things. You have companies like Twitter and Facebook have ramped up how they present news now. Earlier, you could just put anything on Twitter and Facebook and they would never bring it down. But ever since this whole, coronavirus pandemic conspiracy theories, you're seeing more and more media companies, more and more sort of social media companies like Twitter and Facebook reacting to that very quickly and actually taking down information. And one of the biggest things that happened in the last few weeks is when Donald Trump tweeted a few things on Twitter, and Twitter realized that's not right and it goes against the guidelines, they took it down. That's probably the first time Twitter might have done that for an American president or for any world leader.
Right.
So all of these companies have,
yes.
So all of these companies have created opportunities. It has created opportunities. We need a lot more of this though, because the world is not getting any smaller, it's only getting bigger. The problems in the world is also getting bigger. I feel like the last 4 months of lockdown has probably pushed people towards more fake news than it did 4 months ago.
Right.
So we definitely need a lot more efforts in that regard. But I feel like we're making some progress.
Oh, wonderful! I'm so glad that we are here. We connected online, and then I got to learn so much from you, Suhas. Thank you so much. I think it was
Thank you.
really a pleasure to have you with us today. And thanks to the entire WEF team that they have connected us digitally. And
Thank you.
it was really a pleasure. And you have enlightened us with so much of knowledge about media.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks
So,
very much.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Spriha. And on behalf of WEF World Digital Global Summit 2020, we would like to honor you with an award, Iconic Women Creating
Thank you.
a Better World for All. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
our co-speaker unfortunately couldn't join us today, Jocelyn Wall. And but she was kind enough to send us a video, and I would like the host to kindly play a video which I would also request you to kindly stay back with us, and we will
Sure.
look at that piece of video. Thank you.
Expose like was just blown wide open of the last 2 days. So I was wanting to check overstock because I shop at Wayfair Overstock quite a bit. So they have the cabinets and rugs and pro colors. So I put in 50 rugs. Well, not even just me and 8 rugs, okay? And I know some of them are selling for like $12,000, $13,000. Here in Overstock, they're selling for $153,000, $166,000, $150,000. So I'm just showing you enormous prices and just ridiculous. So let's go back to that. I'm going to show you what I found. So I went on this rug here. It's really most expensive. So $150,000. Okay. Went on that one. This is what I found. So let me go back. I'm going to show you the SKU number. Only one left. And the SKU number is 323-9921. I have already pulled it up. So
Hello,
Ah, hello.
Jocelyn here.
Oh, glad Jocelyn, you made it today, and we were
Yes, yes.
just watching your video. Thank you so much for joining us, Jocelyn.
I'm thrilled.
So Jocelyn, we have Spriha with us today here.
Yes. Oh, you have the video? Okay. I also sent another link. Yes. And I wanted to share that because this is an example of fake news. And the purpose of fake news is to misinform and to control narratives. And if you control the narrative, you control the culture. And if you can control the culture, you can control behavior. And that's what creates the polarization, which can lead to a lack of public trust, which indeed can lead to the lack of trust in institutions and government and financial institutions of commerce. In this instance, that very well, if it were taken as valid, that very well could have led to a tumultuous economic scenario for the company. And it's completely untrue. In fact, I hope you had a chance to look at the next link, the last email I sent. Snopes.com proved that indeed this is not the case. It is false, completely false. And this was sent by someone who is a scholar, and she was taken in and believed that it was true. It wasn't until I investigated and went into avenues that I discovered that this indeed was not true about this company. Now, between the few of us, he is notably considered, the owner of the company is notably considered by some a whack job. Some people had considered him a whack job. I don't know him. I haven't cast that aspersion about him, and I wouldn't. But nonetheless, he is not involved in these kinds of actions. And please take a look at Snopes, the last email I sent, because you should have that. I sent it probably about an hour ago. It says urgent, and it says Snopes. Or you can just go to Snopes.com, SNOPES.com, and you can also see information about this, and it's proven to be false. But it's shocking.
Jocelyn, I think it was really nice to hear those words from you, and we've also seen a clip which you shared with our team. So thank you so much for joining us last moment, and you made it, and we're so happy
And
to.
my house is under construction. I kid you not. I have literally 500 square feet of living space out of a space of over 2,000 square feet. So
That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. So thank you so much. So as a token of gratitude from
you're
WEF
very welcome.
2020, we would like to honor you with an award, Iconic Women Creating a Better World for All. Thank you so much for joining us. And it was nice connecting with you, seeing you online and talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you, Spriha, and we will definitely connect
you.
soon. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a wonderful
Bye.
day.
You too. You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.